All right, hello, coffee makers, not coffee takers. He is the master of cyber farms, Alfredo B. Nash Jr., and I am the people's chief, Dr. Joseph J. Bermiller Jr., and we're your hosts for the Cyber Coffee Hour. Now, the Cyber Coffee Hour originates from Mount Vernon, New York, and we're excited to hear the experiences and stories of our incredible guests. Our mission is to share knowledge, deepen understanding, and foster a sense of community in the vast realm of cyberspace. Now, for today's show, we'll have a coffee chat with Field CISO at SquareX, John Carse. Now, John Carse is a Field CISO at SquareX, bringing over 2 decades of cybersecurity expertise to the role. His journey in cybersecurity began in 2003 while working with the U.S. Navy, leading to extensive experience across Japan, Bahrain, Hawaii, and Singapore. Prior to joining SquareX, John held executive security roles at major organizations, including Dyson, Rakuten, Expedia Group, and JPMorgan. At SquareX, John combines his deep technical knowledge and business experience to help enterprises understand and defend against browser-based attacks. A seasoned technologist with multiple cloud security patents, he holds an MBA in entrepreneurship from IE Business School and a bachelor's in computer and information science from the University of Maryland Global Campus. John Carse, welcome to the Cyber Coffee Hour.
Thanks for having me. It's very nice to meet y'all.
Thank you for joining us, John.
Absolutely. So before we dig in, just want to check in and go around the virtual room and just see how everyone's been doing. And John, I'll start with you. Just how things been going for you this past week, and I guess what you have going on for the weekend.
Wow, the week's been pretty busy. It's talking to a lot of SquareX customers and getting, as a field CISO, I do a lot of work around kind of evangelism, kind of like educating people on some problems that that we're seeing in the industry and trying to educate people. So I kind of set up webinars and I do some of my own podcasts as well, and so and then I also get on phone calls with other CISOs and talk to them about their problems. And as a former CISO, working in big companies, I have a lot of understanding for the kind of challenges that they're having. So being able to relate like what our product is and how it relates to their defense strategy is something that I can bring to the table. So spend a lot of time doing that. It's somewhat rewarding in itself. So it's been a good week. I feel like it's been a good week.
Nice.
Awesome. It's great to hear. Alfredo, how about you, sir?
Man, busy week. So just only 10, 15 minutes ago, I was out with a new Peace Park in Baltimore City, Stillmoto Peace Park. Shout out to them. I'm a new Master Naturalist volunteer. So I'm Master Naturalist certified with the state of Maryland. I just came back from a tree giveaway and the blessing of our bioswell now at the Peace Park. So we now have a new bioswell and a couple hundred plants out there in Baltimore City. Whoop, whoop. And that was a busy week of training leading into this event, which was like a ribbon cutting. Prior to that, Thursday, I took a little day off from work to go to Offset Symposium out in Washington, D.C. on the behalf of Second Front, a new mission system and critical asset in our inventory. So I had to check them out. And then just been running the gauntlet. Given the climate, we're not going to talk too much about it. I know I've been running the gauntlet up and down the state and trying to keep my lights on. So I'm busy at work. And just having fun all week.
That's what's up. Yeah, for me, as I always talked about, myself just getting myself prepared for exams. I'm actually preparing. I recently took a SANS course, so I'm preparing to take the SANS GSEC
Nice
exam. I'm probably going to take that by July, and then. And one thing I've noticed when I took the course, so it was like a week and a half day class, and I saw a lot of overlap between that and the CISSP, and which was nice because with CISSP you don't necessarily get like labs when it comes to preparation. As with SANS, you get a ton of labs, which is great. So so when you start hearing different terms or different tools that you're supposed to be familiar with when preparing for the CISSP, again, you don't really get to see what it looks like or get to mess around with it. With the SANS, you get that background, but now you get to do a lab too. So that really helps to really solidify the information and understanding. So I saw this as a big benefit in my preparation for the exam. So so I'm really excited to look for that. And also I'm on a big high, man. Anyone that knows me knows I'm a big Knicks fan. And last night the New York Knicks just defeated the Boston Celtics in New York to go to the Eastern Conference Finals. So New York City right now, 7th Avenue, it's a madhouse. People they're tearing down the streets. It's nuts. So I'm really happy to see. And I know before we got on, John, I know yourself. You're a Houston Rockets fan, so.
That's right.
And I know, and again, I had picked the Houston Rockets to beat the Golden State Warriors in that first round. So honestly, I was very surprised to see that. I thought they had it because, I think Golden State is really on the decline, honestly. And we saw that when they ran up against the Minnesota Timberwolves. So, but no, it's just been fun.
Yeah, I was definitely unhappy about the Rockets losing at that last game. And so they were just on a run and then, just kind of stalled out. Like we were saying earlier, they're a scrappy team. I mean, I felt like they were, young and, going to be very aggressive. And you saw a lot of that, but then,
I think we're seeing a change. I think we're starting to see a change of the guard in the NBA. We saw the Lakers pretty much get swept. They lost like 4-1 in the first round to the Timberwolves. Of course, Golden State being knocked out. And of course, the Knicks knocking out the Celtics. Like we're starting to see some new faces as the playoffs continue to progress, and I think it's refreshing because we're starting to establish some new storylines when it comes to the NBA. So
a new generation, right? It's a 25-year bend for the Knicks, and my brother and whole family's group text is lit up. So it's a 25-year bend to see a generation of the Knicks on top. So. I mean, I was too busy, out in the woods and stuff. But my brother, I haven't heard from him. Like I said, the last episodes. When I don't hear from my brother, I know he's like in the game.
He's locked in. And
then my whole family, they don't bother texting my family down here in Maryland because they group texting until the game is over. So I knew when my text started lighting up that they won.
Oh yeah, it's insane. It's insane.
But it's a 25-year bend, right? It's a 25-year high for the team.
25 years since the last time they've been in the last time they've been in the conference finals, and I think that was the last time that the Knicks made it to the finals because they made it to the finals in the 99-2000 season, but they ran up against San Antonio, a young Tim Duncan. It was a gentleman's sweep. We lost 4-1 in that final, so we had no shot. Patrick Ewing was hurt. We had some big injuries, get into that, but yeah, we was pretty much no match against San Antonio. But all right, so we'll get into this. So, John, just learn about you and also just learn about your as your cybersecurity journey began in 2003 with the U.S. Navy and has taken you across multiple continents. How did your military background shape your approach to cybersecurity leadership in the private sector at companies like JPMorgan, like Expedia, and now SquareX?
Well, I think that like my IT career started early on. I mean, I think I got my first computer when I was a kid. I was like in 1982, and got into working for different enterprises. So I did some commercial work before I worked with the U.S. Navy. Working at companies like IBM, Global Services, and rolling out systems to banks and that kind of stuff. Early in my career, and then I started working with the U.S. Navy, and I was never in the military. I was always a contractor to the military. So I started working with them in 2003 as a network and system management lead for our outside continental U.S. networks with the Navy. And so they said, "Hey, John, can you go to Japan for 6 weeks?" And I'm like, "Hey, I can do anything for 6 weeks." And so I went out there and was checking out what they were doing. That turned into me working with the U.S. Navy till 2014 or so, and then moved to Japan in 2006 because they needed more consistent help in adopting some of the technologies that we were working on. But in that 2003 area, what got me into cybersecurity is I was just building systems. I was building Oracle databases on Unix platforms and putting ITIL systems on them and enterprise management systems and those kinds of things. And that was just, you can rip out a hard drive out of that system and it would keep running, right? So it was a very resilient system. It was very much in my, kind of solution architecture kind of roles that I've had previous to that. And then they were like, "Hey, your stuff's not secure." And I'm like, what are you talking about? I have no idea what you're saying. They're like, "It's not secure." I'm like, "What do you mean it's not secure?" I mean, it's resilient. Watch me. I pulled this hard drive out and it stays up. And they're like, "Yeah, do you want to get paid?" I'm like, "Yeah, then go secure your system." So then I started reading through all the DISA stigs and everything else, and trying to figure out like how to configure this box or correctly, and learning through that in 2003 just so I could get to the end. I mean, it was kind of forcing me into the security space. That's really what kind of got me into cybersecurity, was just learning like, hey, oh, wow, I had these decisions that I could make about this configuration. I had these decisions about what software I was putting on a box. I had these decisions about what the password strength was going to be and the complexity, et cetera. And those configuration elements were pretty interesting. I'm sorry, my dog.
Very good.
And then, coffee. All right. So so as I was getting into it, I also, bought like a Sun Solaris box that I had at home, and I put it on the internet so I could keep working on things while I was globe trotting, supporting the U.S. Navy and all the little facilities in Bahrain and Japan and Naples and Hawaii. And so I was just going around every 6 weeks doing stuff with everyone. And so I go back to my system that I was doing my engineering work. And at some point in time, it was just really bogged down. It was really like not working the way I expected it to be. And it turned out that my system had been compromised, right? And someone had gotten on it with SSH and learned that I didn't really set the Oracle password correctly. I kept the default Oracle password. So someone's SSH is Oracle. This is like in 2003 time period, right? And my system was, used for a download server for all sorts of movies and everything else that was going on in the world at the time.
Yeah.
And I was like, but what, kind of, like, it was real. I mean, it became really real that, I had to secure a system, before I put it on the internet. But one of the nice things about my configuration, even though I had a failure in it, was that I actually had all the logs and everything else that I needed to see what was actually going on the system. And I figured out, I mean, I know what password was compromised, right? I know what, where the connections and stuff were coming from and everything else. And, it really kind of, brought hey, conceptually, what is security? How do I configure it correctly? And then again, from a response perspective, how do you investigate and how do you respond back to those things to get your system back up and running? And it was a good learning experience on on my home network that I had at, in Texas. And so it was, that's what kind of got me into cybersecurity and kind of got me kind of hooked, in that I was actually feeling like I was doing something that was important to supporting the war fighters and making sure that systems were secure. I mean, it was meaningful to me. And I think that from how did it shape my approach to cybersecurity? I mean, I think part of it is my previous experience I already knew how systems worked. I knew how to troubleshoot systems. I knew when something wasn't working. I knew what logs to go look at. But when you're doing cybersecurity, you have the same kind of log sets. You may want more log sets as well. It's what your purpose for the investigation changes, right? And, when you're worried about availability, you're worried about who made changes to a box that caused the system to fail or who installed something. But on cyber, you're trying to figure out like, hey, how did someone get on that box? What did they do? What do your audit logs say about what's happening? And the other thing about working with the military is that we had a lot of structure in place with respect to how do we get something into production. Those were quite a bit different than working in commercial, right? So we didn't really have what we do. I mean, of course, companies do have change management. They do have, they want systems to stay up and running, but getting a system and like making sure that it's secure, making sure that it doesn't ever go online before it's secure, that is not something we really see in commercial space. So with respect to, I think that the hardest part for me was two transitions. One was going from commercial into military government work. Was like, in commercial work, it was like, let's go get a contract, let's go get this stuff done, and let's go execute. And I never had to worry about the color of money. In the government, you always have to worry about the color of money. And it's like, is this CapEx money or OpEx money? Right. And it's like, and it's like, how are you going to be spending it? What's this, what budget is coming from? And then going and competing and, trying to find the money in the contract vehicles, completely different than working in commercial. Right. And then you go from in the cybersecurity space, going from, a very structured approach to how things, need to be. Oh, God, what is the term? It's been a while since I, had to, use it, but it's the term where they, your ATO, your authority to operate.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Right, your ATO. Yeah. And you have SOVOTs and everything else that you have in the military. But as you do changes, you can actually check to see if your system's actually operational, right? And then how many people does it take to, we had all sorts of things like in a fleet system, on a Navy system. You have to know how much it weighs, even though it's going to be on a terrestrial environment. You had to know how much it weighed and how many people were going to be needed to support it, so that if they did need to take the system, put it on a ship, you knew what the ballast was going to be for it and how many racks you needed so you could actually get people to use it. Again, very structured. You get your ATO, you get to put a system online, then you have to go maintain that system, and there's a lot of structure. In commercial, it really wasn't like that, right? It's not like that. And I think the hardest thing going back into commercial was actually just dealing with the ambiguity of systems that were coming online and what their state was. Because if you can imagine, there's hundreds of thousands of systems and servers inside of financial services network, and they're all built by 1,500 different business units that are doing things. It is a little crazy and complex. And then what folks need to do, how those systems got online, could have gone any kind of path. As long as someone accepted the risk, it was pretty much available to go online. So completely different. I remember having conversations with people. You can't do that. Let me tell you what the problem is with this. And they were like, well, the fine for that's like
80 million.
Yeah, it was like $25,000, but to fix the problem, it's like $3 million. So what should I do, John? I'm like, oh, business. Oh, crap. I guess we'll take the fine. Bingo, right? And so you're making these kind of like, risk-based business decisions in commercial, whereas in the military, it had nothing to do with it was everything to do with we were going to prevent as many risks as possible, and whether that cost us time to deploy it, no problem. If it required us to have people do things manually, no problem. It was going to be safe and secure. On the business side, it's a little bit different. There was definitely a learning experience for me going back into commercial, but a lot of it, but we didn't have the same kind of problems at a bank or a technology company that we have with military systems, right? When we're trying to figure out how to get missiles on ships, we need that Java app to work, right? So
Right.
we want that, and we want it to be secure.
So,
I don't have missiles on ships problems in tech companies.
right. I could jump in a little bit, John, because you guys are both catching me up on the military side. We don't have continuous ATO in the commercial. Let's just be real. And I know we're going to get comments and letters and stuff. Continuous ATO is not DevSecOps. I said it. The same thing is when you say in the military, change management is not config management in the commercial side. We try to rush and fast pace a platform or product, but that software doesn't unalive folks. That software, to your point, doesn't have a web vulnerability that can lead to a particular missile system or a conveyor belt or a transport system. So you guys are catching me up on that side because only recently did we learn what DevSecOps is, right? So DevSecOps is the agile methodology to ship and package things across 100,000 cattle servers, not pet servers.
Yeah.
It's just a recent 7 to 10 year thing, and to ensure app security of that environment. So your point is 100% on, right? The private sector is only catching up to that baseline, like DISA, right? CIS, NIST, all the control frameworks under the sun, and packaging them to say, all right, this is ready to get on a plane. This is ready to get on a boat. This is ready to get on a ground system. I just came, and I'll shout out again, I just came from Offset Synopsis Symposium. Second Factor Systems is doing it. So they're not sending us any checks yet, but they're the middle ground between .gov and .mil, right? They're the middle ground now also between .gov and .com. So a lot of those baselines didn't exist. I've been, like you said, you said Solaris to me, and it took the cobwebs off my head. That's when I was starting in IT.
Yeah.
So when you said that, even then, like that early 2000s going into the mid 2000s, we didn't have that. We had Ansible. We had Puppet, maybe.
Cloud either, right?
Right. We had on-prem, right. We had on-prem clustered servers.
Didn't have Google search to answer our question.
Right. We had a sysadmin handbook right next to the right. But that goes right into our next question pretty well. As a field CISO at SquareX, you focus on browser-based attacks. What emerging browser security threats do you believe are most underestimated by enterprises today? And how is the threat landscape evolving?
Yeah, I think we, kind of going back to the, what I was just saying is that, the current defensive the current defense in depth strategies that I think most companies are using today are wrapped around, people that went to the office. We had our own data centers. We racked and stacked our own servers, and we had all these little fat apps that we wrote in Visual Basic or whatever to get our systems to work. And that relied on, and if you remember, we used to get the biggest attack surface we had was actually email through phishing attacks. And then people have an Adobe or Java, what was it, Adobe or Flash apps or all these kind of like weird little things that we used to use that we don't really use today that were being compromised because we had Adobe PDF readers on our boxes and all these other little fat apps that had all sorts of vulnerabilities. It made sense that you have EDR tools and you had secure web gateways and you had proxy servers to kind of control your access. And I remember us managing our firewall rule sets with the Navy and our DNS, black holing DNS things, all the things that we do with Raspberry Pi hole today. Those things we did decades ago with the military, just very manually. We didn't have, we just had to redo the DNS servers and stuff like that kind of manually. In today's world, we stopped deploying fat apps everywhere. There are still fat apps. You still have Adobe Photoshop that you deploy down to your systems, and you still have Adobe Acrobat that's being deployed to systems. But today, most apps are not running in your data center. They're running in the cloud. They're SaaS apps that are being built. They're taking advantage of a very complex architectures that Chrome and Firefox and Safari make available to users with respect to HTML5. As a point of reference, we are currently sitting in a app that's recording this video, all using HTML5 and some extension architecture that is recording us right now. Right? I mean, this would have been a custom app 20 years ago. But now we just have these SaaS apps that are available to everyone, and they just keep coming out. For the product we were using here, we have multiple competitors that we were talking about before the show. The world has changed. It's no longer your data center and your endpoint and, worrying about, you still need to worry about phishing attacks, of course. And there's a place for EDR tools and SWG and SASE, but who's protecting the browser? We're accessing all these apps, all these SaaS apps through a browser, and then there's OAuth scopes and extensions that people are being asked to. There's complex code. There's context that's available there, and we don't have IDSs anymore. We don't have IPSs that are blocking things because we're not controlling the traffic flows like we used to. Everyone talks about end-to-end security today, which means that if you're using Diffie-Hellman or some other kind of protocol to secure that traffic, you can't just take a certificate and stick it in your IPS and now you can inspect it and look for bad traffic. The only place that you can really do that is the browser. So with respect to, focus on browser-based attacks, what we're really talking about is in the browser, you have clear text. It's clear. It's in the clear. It might as well be Telnet. And you can see exactly what's happening in the browser. You can see the DOM changes, the open communications port. And I'm sure, we have users that go into developer tools in Chrome and they can see everything that happens on there. Imagine having all that telemetry so that you can detect and prevent threats in your environment. Stuff that we used to take for granted 20 years ago when we controlled the data centers and the endpoints and we had fat apps. And that new attack surface is the browser. I mean, it's a long-winded answer. I hope I answered the question, but
let's piggyback on that a little bit because you're right. The browser of choice, they expect the tools. I have to use that for my job every day. And most of the point is, like you said, you can drop a policy or header down, but good luck securing the browser, right? You have to be a researcher or someone in that profession to use a tool to scan that particular content. To your point, mostly in the clear, mostly going across multiple gateways. And then client side, a lot of the issues that I see client side is some silly cookie or some silly thing that came in and said, all right, I have an authentication token that could get me to this database, and I won't cough up too much, but I noticed, to your point, there's a lot of web app scanners. There's tons of over 20 years of doing this. There's hundreds of scanners in the ecosystem that go back to OWASP, that go back to the things that people, like you said, were just getting off the ground around. And now it's almost exhausting for SaaS. Every time a browser changes, every time a data center changes, every time a API gateway goes online, it's exhausting to see how many clients are insecure by default. Now, I don't want to poke up politically, but it's already insecure. So now we got to go back and look at all of the app scanners. I put one in the chat. All of the different environments. To your point, we have low, high, dev, QA, non-prod, prod, pre-prod. The litany of SaaS-based environments that some people can't afford. They pay 3 or 4 times before they're in production on the commercial side. So
Yeah.
it's unbelievable. Yeah, I agree with you. The browser, and it doesn't matter where AI goes either. You're going to start in a common web app, a common cluster, just like back in the day, and then that's going to be hosted against your HTML5 or your bigger data sets over at Gemini.
Yeah. Well, so kind of continuing, right? Is that now you're, what's happening is that, and one of the things that I got most concerned about in my last role was so I had a big intellectual property protection program at Dyson, right? And that program was, Dyson likes to keep secret, right? I mean, a lot of companies want to keep their secret, but for Dyson, it's a competitive advantage, meaning that as they introduce new products, they're trying to disrupt a market. And when they try to disrupt that market, they don't want anyone to know that they're doing anything with it until they launch, which allows them to capture a lot of value early on in their disruption. So, I think most people know about Dyson and vacuum cleaners, and Dyson now have a lot of fans and other kinds of equipment that goes in your house. The hair dryers and other beauty kind of stuff, that wasn't something that people saw coming, right? But keeping a lid on that was really important. So we had like 144 different items that we were trying to protect. And I was, somewhat surprised at how many gaps were just in the browser. Just like, how do I stop someone from going from personal, taking something from enterprise OneDrive and pasting it into personal OneDrive, right? Or pasting something from over here into Pastebin, right? Pastebin's probably pretty easy to close off and just, don't let traffic flow that direction. But when you're inside these SaaS apps, some of these SaaS apps are going to actually have sanctioned uses in an organization, where some of them, they also have a free version of it. So which one are they using? And do you have that context to be aware of where people are moving your data? And what I found in my own investigations, my own audits, was that we, maybe have a third of the apps that are sanctioned, and SaaS apps, right? So in my particular investigation, I think we had like 230 SaaS apps that the company was using. And those were under SSO and part of our IAM, our identity and access management kind of controls and conditional access policies and those kinds of things. But we had another 600 of them that were just, unsanctioned. We didn't even know that people were using them until we did our audit. And if you think about like the disparity of like where people are able to put data in all these different apps, Shadow SaaS is what I refer it to it as, kind of a subset of Shadow IT, is that there's just data going everywhere, right? And how do you control that in your environments if you're only in your only mechanism and your browser's secure? I mean, I haven't seen like a 0-day or a privilege escalation kind of vulnerability in like Chrome since 2022 or so, right? But that's cool. I like that it's secure, but that's not the problem that I think enterprises are having. I think the enterprises are having, how do they control their data? Who has access to their data? What SaaS apps that people are using, do they have the right OAuth scopes, right? Because sometimes you go in there and they ask for a lot of privileges that they don't really need, and if they're doing it with their corporate credentials and signing with Google and all that kind of stuff, maybe you can get control of it. But if they're just using, their corporate credentials to get in there, but it's not part of your SSO, then how do you gain back the control of that information? So there's lots of, and I guess what I'm trying to say is that over time, technology changes, right? How we deploy technology changes. How, whether it's containers or virtual machines or whatever, that changes over time. And our ability to defend needs to change with it. right? But you got to
You're right.
actually be cognizant of the change that's there. So if you think about web apps, right? It used to be that people were hacking firewalls and trying to, bypass SSH and hacking those. And then it turned into we started doing a bunch of web apps, and going to your OWASP point a second ago, is that they started attacking the software, and that's where like the OS top 10 stuff kind of happened. Now we're like looking for logic faults in the software so we can get access to confidential data. And then as that got more complicated, then we've always been attacking the user through phishing and that kind of stuff. But now that we're kind of going into this SaaS-based world where 80% of our time is in a browser today, that is a shift, right? That's a different way of working. We don't have as many engineers that are on staff that are deploying our software into our own data centers. We're relying on SaaS providers to do all that operational heavy lifting for keeping Microsoft Exchange up and running that we used to do ourselves, that we don't do today. But that also introduces some amount of risk because of just how many SaaS apps there are and how easy they are to get into. So web is great, browsers are great. They made it easier for us to deploy. SaaS brings a lot of value to organizations, but with that shift comes some risk that we need to take a look at.
Absolutely. And I think you make an interesting point is where, as you mentioned, as technology changes, when we're trying to defend our systems, the way we defend needs to change or keep up at that same pace as well. And I think you're always going to have that balance, as you mentioned, John, that balance of risk where, yes, you may have something that's convenient that works to help your organization, but then now that same convenient shiny thing that you want to utilize may introduce a new set of risks that now you have to make sure that you and your organization are prepared to withstand. So I think honestly that's just going to be always going to be an ongoing battle. I think no matter like what option, I think it's just matter like how much you want to deal with when in terms of risk. But I don't think you're ever going to get away from it.
We
It's
will
just how
always
much.
have jobs. We will
Yeah,
always have.
we can go back a couple episodes too. I want
Yeah.
to piggyback on that. It can't be business as usual. We will have jobs once everyone starts realizing it's remediation required. A lot of these SaaS tools are going to require, like you said, a dev team, a SaaS disclosure, a red teamer. Shout out to those that know that profession. They're going to need someone that's expert in the browser to say, hey, we're not looking for just software flaws. To your point, John, we're looking for business logic flaws. You don't have a coverage, and you don't have an admin, you don't have a DevOps team, you don't have a technical project owner, a project manager, you don't have a senior manager that knows how to code. Those logic flaws allow the adversary to say, well, this is hosted globally. I should be able to attack this browser side app anywhere in the world. The other caveat is we can't keep cheating and using AI to write our code, which is coming next. Those implement business logic flaws that me, a common layperson or cybersecurity professional, may not have the development skills to fix that software. And I might need to rely on a DevOps engineer or DevSec engineer to say, hey, can you close this gap before we get our next risk review or before we get our next audit? And usually it's happening faster. 30, 60, 90, 45, 15, 30, right? You memorize how long we have to fix these particular bugs because the time window is getting shorter with AI. So it's a lot of these flaws that worry me. And to your point, they're scaled globally opposed to site now, to your point. But that plays into another question we have. You hold multiple cloud security patents and have an entrepreneur MBA. How does the combination of tech innovation and business acumen influence your approach to communicating security risk and solutions to executive leadership? And we can piggyback onto that topic too.
You kind of mentioned it, right? Is that the business in cyber for me, right? And I'd love to hear your opinions on this, but the business is going to do what it's going to do, right? Business has a strategy. They want to penetrate a market. They want to go somewhere, whatever that outcome or objective, whether it's a government, military, private company, public company, it doesn't really matter. They have some objective that they're trying to meet. What happens next is that people start bringing technology to the table, and they start saying, hey, this is the technology that we think we're going to use, if that makes sense, right? To use technology. And today we don't talk about digital transformation as much as we did, 15 years ago. But companies are still transforming. We're always transforming. Companies are always transforming. What that tends to do is that, again, you have a business strategy. Now you have a technical implementation strategy. Then you have your cybersecurity strategy, right? it's, the cybersecurity strategy is going to be based on the technology that's employed. Now, in the best of all possible worlds, the IT strategy and the cyber strategy, those folks are working hand in hand so that they're in lockstep, right? With making good technology choices. You don't use Haskell for writing all your DevOps code. Maybe you should just use GitHub Enterprise, right? We don't have to make our own, or we don't have to, maybe something, it's like, let's not build our own encryption technology. Let's use something that works, right? That everyone knows about, and we don't have to worry about our own logic problems. But where it comes into play is that understanding what the business is trying to do and how they're going to probably try to get there. That's way more meaningful, right? Because I mean, if you just think about like what people talk about normally is in the boardroom, is they're talking about like vulnerabilities, like how many vulnerabilities we have and why aren't we patching them, and those kinds of things. And that's probably the easiest thing for people to talk about because it's the one that we can have the most data about. But if everything was as severe as cyber professionals said it was, like, oh, we have these 700 critical vulnerabilities on this number of servers, then why aren't we being exploited all the time? Why aren't we? Do you have an answer? Okay, why?
I'll just take a bite of that apple, and I hope that I
Okay.
don't get shot down. But even in the cyber coffee hour, we always are told the cybersecurity strategy is last. We don't have a seat at the table to say how many of your competitors have been breached in production, because no one's talking across the table. The second thing is, it's not 700,000 or even 500,000 criticals. It's maybe 50 that are chained together in the industry. And that's what I feel like that's not being conveyed from the CISO up to the board, is that how many in this sector have seen that attack chain leveraged successfully in Colonial Pipeline? Or how many have seen it across the Verizon breach report in banking, my favorite sector, right? That talk across the table usually happens at an earnings call, and most cyber professionals are not there in the earnings call. They're usually there after the thought, when the audit occurs, or when there's a new scope to project into, like a new business bank app, right? Or a new projection into a mobile app. So a lot of times the CISO is not even included until post remediation. We saw a competitor got breached. We saw attack vectors came in, and it was leveraged successfully, but it's still pending investigation. Our legal counsel might say, hey, we are not disclosing that across particular avenues of trust or trust boundaries, right? They don't disclose it to cyber until after incident. And we had a gentleman on that talked about precognitive crime, right? Luigi from before AI. You can't project that far out on a threat model of how many banks have been compromised with this particular mobile app release. So that's really a table stakes of trying to remove risk for impact and likelihood, the other side of the equation that we don't talk about in cross-sector analysis. Cybersecurity professionals, they have to skill up and be invited to have that conversation and sit at that boardroom table in such a manner, I would believe.
Yeah, but that's the thing, is that we've got to skill up to, I mean, I think that we've got to skill up. We've got to understand what the business objectives are. We can't be the Department of No or the Department of Woe, right? we got to understand likeliness and impact. I think that we tend to get it wrong. And you just think about your normal cybersecurity practitioner, and I'm just going to give you, like, let me give you John's profile. John likes to follow rules. John likes to do the right thing, right? And that's me. What I want from everyone else is to do the right thing, right? That's what so I build policies, and I'm hoping to build policies that people can actually execute on, and that then it's like that's what I want. But that all because something is the right way to do something, or it's the right way, or it's the best practice way, doesn't mean it's going to, it's actually going to, I think, move the needle with respect to an impact occurring or not occurring, right? Of course, I would love my teams to patch. I mean, I think I'd actually built, me and a couple guys for the Navy, we'd built like a vulnerability management system back in like 2005 after an audit that went bad. And we had this whole system for like taking all this stuff and identifying what the vulnerabilities were and how to create patches to deploy through Tivoli enterprise management systems. We did all this stuff, and we were able to roll out vulnerabilities, roll out patches to systems in our network like within a few days. I mean, I never had like Cat 1s that were over a week old. I mean, and of course, I would give little not floppy disks, but CDs to the field services guys and just send them out with the fuses for any system that we couldn't automate. Ample number of, uh, enlisted guys to go out there and just go patch systems.
Right.
They were all authorized overtime for this. But that was possible in that environment, but it's not such a real thing to do in corporations. I mean, a lot of times corporations, for their custom integrations between all these apps, they don't know what's going to break when they patch. And there's a lot of FUD and a lot of fear and uncertainty, and like, hey, if I make a change to a system, is it going to come back up and run afterwards? And there are strategies around that too. But I mean, I would almost say that if the likelihood of a problem or an impact that was going to occur was as often as we said it was going to occur, then there would be more breaches. And I don't think it's an information. I mean, I'm just talking about companies that I've worked at. I'm not talking about, and I worked in lots of different industries. Again, I didn't see those breaches. Even though we had so many vulnerabilities, I didn't see breaches because of vulnerabilities. I actually saw more breaches because of just loss of control of identity than I ever saw for breaches. Right now, and not that I didn't see 0 days that were being used against it, that like, for example, what was that one in like 2014, 2015 time period? There was that Heartbleed. Yeah. And they could just go and attack against a website, and we were able to scrape information, like login credentials off login sites just because of how that attack kind of worked. And that's, address those fast. You're not going to get around that. But the number of times, like I said, the number of breaches that I've seen that were just people putting their API credentials into GitHub, or putting their enterprise, or just losing, or just using the same password at different websites than they're being reused. Like the 2014 JPMorgan Chase big breach with like 81 million records that were lost. That, I don't know if y'all remember that.
I do.
Yeah, my team discovered that. So I was at JPMorgan Chase at the time. That's, we had like a marathon website that JPMorgan Chase people were going into to sign up for the marathon, but they were using their JPMorgan Chase identities, the same user, same password, to do that. And then that system, which was not on the network, was compromised, but those were the credentials. And those credentials were then used to, bypass other security controls, right? And it was a very complex, long-winded kind of problem. But those things caused me more problems than unpatched systems. And that's been probably pretty universal in my experience but control identity. I mean, anyways, I guess I was kind of saying that, again, if we're going to go to the boardroom, if we're going to say, hey, let's go do this, we got to focus on actual threats. I'm very much threat driven, meaning that if I see something, I want to remediate it, right? As opposed to risk driven, which is, could this happen? I should do something about it. I'd rather focus on things that I actually see happening in my environment than things that could be happening in my environment. If I get to the point of my maturity that I can do those other things as well, then great, let's go do those other things. Right. But I think we got to understand that you're never going to be ahead of all the 0 days, right? You're never going to be there. You're never going to, most corporate environments, you're not going to be able to patch everything, right? You're going to be introducing new code and integration. So you're going to have continuous stream of new vulnerabilities that you're introducing into your business processes. And my approach has been always to, detect fast and respond great. If you can detect fast and you can respond great, you can take any problem and make it a smaller problem, right? Contain, eradicate, recover fast, right? But when we go to the boardroom, we start talking about the business. What were those likelihoods and impact, and where should we be investing? And then how do we communicate the results back to the business that, hey, these investments that you've been making are paying off? And how do we relate that to the overall business strategy when we're 3 parts away? If we're business strategy, technology strategy, then cyber strategy, how do we get into that talk? And we gotta, and again, we're one part of the risk equation with if we're focused on technology and cyber risk. When the business actually has lots and lots of other risks that are geopolitical in nature, they might be doing manufacturing in China, or they might be selling into Chinese markets. They might be working with EU and worrying about AI kind of problems with the regulations over there. Those things can impact the business a lot as well. But technology risk is one part of it, but there's lots of other risks that the business are attuned to. We can't get everyone that's talking about risk into the boardroom for every conversation. So how is it that the CISO is going to level up so that they are more of a holistic risk kind of person, right? Versus just a technology risk person? Because you don't talk about technology risk in the boardroom every day.
Yeah. I think we're leaning into a generational change where we are leveling up talking about the impact. To your point, global ransomware operations, right? Global ransomware just hit the Verizon breach report as 32% related to system intrusions. I don't know a CISO that doesn't memorize that, but they have this year said that those system intrusions hasn't been happening until the last 10 or so years. So we're now finally seeing the compromises because folks are starting to say, well, where's my config management? Where does it exist in the software factory if I am a software vendor, right? Because a lot of businesses aren't the ones turning out the software. They're third-party risk people, like you said, is SaaS. The other thing is the disclosures are becoming more of a likelihood conversations that CISOs can have. Third-party risk, vuln disclosure, vulnerability responsibility. That's how we get the word out, and the CISOs start writing those policies, to your point, John, across sector. So if I don't have a vulnerability, and hey, punch my own ticket. I'm not a CISO, never been one. I think it's a very stressful job. You can disclose carefully and responsibly across sector. That's how information sharing starts happening. Because a lot of the things that I've seen across sector is no one's disclosing. The military doesn't disclose to the private sector because there's mission. Private sector is not going across sector because there's equity and money, the color of green that you said before. A lot of people are not going to cough up their secrets across multiple sectors and compete and say, I could disclose my critical vulnerabilities, because that would give away the secrets to how they secured their software. So this is I think this is worth another episode, to be honest with you, because CISOs are leveling up to the impact based on the breach reports and the words getting out in the private sector. Also, the likelihood, the ticket we're punching is supply chain compromise and global ransomware operations. We've seen that uptick in the last 5 to 7 years, and more CISOs are at the table talking to the board about those impacts. But it's a generational change, more so like, not so much like you said, a technical thing. It's a mindset thing to why is this important to my sector. And why is this important to my board?
So we have field CISO at SquareX, John Carse, here on the Cyber Coffee Hour, part of the Alive podcast network, as we transition to the back half of our episode here, as we learn more about John and a couple things he likes to do, especially when it comes to like coffee preference and things like that. But we get to learn a little bit more. But I'll let Fredzo fire the first one off.
All right, let's go. So we touched on a little bit, but we'll double dip. What are the most significant emerging threats in cybersecurity today, and how should organizations prepare for?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I think the big gap today is SaaS apps. I think people don't really recognize how bad off they are with respect to their environment. I think I saw an Okta report a few months ago, and Okta's report said that the average company has like 131 apps. And then I saw another report. And again, this mirrors what I saw in my own audits, was that only a third of their apps are under management, right? So again, it's like if the average company has like 131 SaaS apps, and that's a third, then that means they probably have a couple hundred that they don't know about. And it may not be that hundreds of users or thousands of users are using that app, but it could be onesies and twosies. So I think that getting control of your SaaS apps, understanding your OAuth, and your OAuth scopes that your users are inviting other SaaS apps into your organization with, so to speak. I think those are two important vectors that CISOs need to be taking a look at. I mean, I think that, again, most of the CISOs that I know are somewhat reliant on EDRs, are looking for breaches that are happening inside their organization, right? That are happening from inside. However, that's not where our data is. That's not where our users are working. Our users are working inside other people's environments and their SaaS apps, and we're putting our data there. That's where our data is. That's where we should be looking for breaches or compromises, right? Or I mean, again, this goes down to loss of control of your data. I'm not saying that these users are evil or that they're trying to do the wrong thing. I think a lot of them are logging into these SaaS apps so that they can get their job done more effectively or as effective as they want to work, right? And that's okay. But I do think that SaaS apps, we need to be taking a closer look at that. And I think Pat Opit, the CISO for JPMorgan Chase, he actually was talking about third-party supplier risk in SaaS apps, and that kind of get that in control. He had like an open letter before RSA. If you haven't looked at that, take a look. That's just another indicator that SaaS apps are something to look at.
John, if you have that link, we'll put it in the show notes. I'm gonna try to search for it. But yeah, so you said that was at RSA that he was speaking to.
He did an open letter. It was Pat Opet. I'll get it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we appreciate
we could pick that up at the end.
Mhm.
Well, for John, for you, like, what are some of the, I guess, significant obstacles you encountered in your path to success, and how did you navigate them?
I think, as I was telling y'all earlier, I like people to do things the right way. I think one of the reasons why I liked working with the military is because it had like a list of rules, and I had to do this, and it was like black and white whether I was doing it or not doing it. It was a good education opportunity for me. I think that for me, one of the biggest challenges, was actually kind of having all the rules and knowing all the rules, and then being okay with the fact that people aren't going to follow all the rules, and that everything's still going to be okay. Right. And I think that if I wanted to be very preventative, and I think earlier in my CISO journey and earlier in my executive journey, I would rather be right and be hated than be equitable in my approach to cybersecurity programs. I think John 1.0, y'all would have really disliked John, 5.0, easier going. I actually recognize that there are many different paths to securing environments, and some technologies are better than others. So I think that being, again, I think part of that MBA experience was kind of understanding that the business has objectives and that the business is going to accept risk. If there's no risk, there's no reward. And part of that risk is actually technology risks. Sometimes we're going to have to take technology risks so that we can move our programs and capture markets and those kinds of things better. But I think that was a big challenge for me. At one point in time, I think it's less of a challenge
Right.
for me today.
Awesome. And so for lighten the mood a little bit, one of our most important questions of the show: which coffee helps you get through? Which coffee that helps you power through your day? What's your preference? Excuse me.
So, so I like the Nespressos. Do you have Nespressos?
Yeah.
So I've had an espresso machine for I don't know how many years, and it has a lot of and I really like just like the dark, strong coffee, and just black coffee, and
Motor oil.
yeah, more like motor oil and stuff, and I've enjoyed that. But I like my little Nespresso because it does the steaming of the cream. So I like Breve, kind of like
Right.
base kind of cappuccinos. That's my favorite, but the stronger the better. I might put a little bit of sugar in it, but I'm either drinking coffee black or I'm drinking it with
Right.
tasting.
Yeah.
What do y'all
Yeah.
like?
Yeah, I was gonna say. So I have an espresso, but both are home, and then I bought another one to keep at work at my desk as well. Because
I
Nice.
did
Double
the
dipping.
same thing. I had one in my desk, and people would come to my office. I was like, "Would you like an espresso?"
right.
So
And also it's part of like a cost savings tactic as well, just to keep me from buying. I'm like, man, I
Yeah,
have
yeah.
coffee at home. Why are you buying? Saying so. I keep one at home and then keep one at the desk at work. Fred's he's about to jump in.
yeah, so I double dipped. I'm kind of getting rid of Dunkin'. I've washed Dunkin' out of my system. Unfortunately, I just can't do it anymore. It's not maintainable in my current system. And we do have a new coffee that we're probably gonna do another segment on called Firewall Coffee. I've tried the dark espresso, and now I mix it with and this is gonna be crazy, Cafe Bustelo. So I've just tried that recently. I've gotten through a bag of it, and it's amazing. And I do it hot and ice. So if I go on the road and I have like the old, pot of regular brew coffee, I'll mix it in an iced coffee, so I don't get one at Dunkin'. But we do have a segment coming up for Firewall Coffee. Rick Weaver, we're gonna shout you out soon here. Sorry we took so long. But that espresso is espresso. It is strong. Don't water it down too much. And then I have a backup machine, a DeLonghi machine. I finally dusted off and I put up against the wall. There's like kind of like a homage to, hey, I'm gonna use this machine eventually. Side of desk of that, I'm using I do use Zeke's coffee at home and Black Acres Coffee, two Baltimore local companies or Maryland companies. And I keep them in reserve for regular brew coffee. But eventually, I'm gonna step my game up and start using my espresso machine.
Good. I actually love brew coffee. I was talking to my brother about that the other day. Is that I used to make brew coffee all the time, but it was different because I had more people around. So it's like if I made a cup, one of the things I love about brew coffee is I can make it and I can keep it hot, right?
Yeah.
I love it. I love hot coffee, and then I can drink it. But I think over the last few years, I've been stepping down the amount of coffee I've been drinking. It's like, you have a stressful job,
Yeah.
increasing the coffee intake.
There's definitely a correlation.
It definitely is. The more stressful, the hotter the pot.
It's like your opportunity to get yelled at in a meeting is higher if I'm drinking like 3 or 4 cups of coffee and I'm stressed out than if I'm drinking 1 cup of coffee and I'm trying to maintain my stress levels.
Then we cool it down.
Being kind to the people around me.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
I get it. I definitely like that correlation.
So, John, if you could have any superpower to help you in cybersecurity, what would it be and why?
Well, I think it's just like empathy. If I could just have like a deep well of empathy, that I think that would be, it's a great superpower to have, is to be able to understand that someone else's point of view and understand like what their stresses are about it. I think as a CISO, you get to the point where you feel like you've heard the same story again and again and again. Like, oh, well, you're going to impact my latency if you do this. Yeah, tell me what your latency requirement is for your website, that you can't control latency on the internet. What is your requirement? I mean, you keep hearing the same kind of stories, and my empathy level just keeps going down. And I really wish I could keep my empathy level up so that I can, navigate those difficult conversations better. I think that would be the superpower that I think I would want to have.
I think that's amazing. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Dr.
No. You got it.
I think that's amazing because we've said to most AI practitioners, right, the advantage we have in cyber is that empathy can exist mathematically. So that's an amazing superpower, because as it lowers, you can assume that AI is not empathetic at all. So you still have that advantage of human inference. And yes, even though it's low, I can still bolster it up with these conversations, because AI is not. AI is going to make a careless, heartless decision and say, so what about latency? Let's plow through it.
You just don't have enough. Features to bring the empathy into it.
Yeah, right. And some of them are bugs. Some of the bugs might be, some of them are going to be empathetic bugs.
So, John, and last question as we have you on here, what are some of your hobbies, interests, or recreational activities you enjoy outside of?
So one of the things that I'm getting involved, there's 2 things, right? I think that one is that I've started playing pickleball.
Nice. It's the 3rd time we heard it.
Phenomenon.
I'm going to have to get into this.
It is, I used to play tennis, and the little town that I live in is a little town called Lovelady. It's north of Houston, about an hour and a half. And we don't have tennis courts here at all, but we do have one pickleball court. So it's something that, I can do with my son. We were playing, I just moved back to Texas from Singapore after being there for 2 years. And my son and I were playing there. And then, but this is something that he and I can do together, and my wife can do as well. And it's fun. It's quick. It's fun. It's really fun. The other thing that we started is we set up a Lovelady Lions Club. So we just started Lions Club, and last week I did my first real volunteer kind of thing that I haven't. I'm not a volunteer kind of guy, But I'm the treasurer for the Lovely Lions Club, and we did a Crockett, which is another little city here in Texas, north of us, Crockett rodeo. And we had like an actual professional rodeo that we put on as part of the Crockett Lions Club. And it was amazing. It was like so much fun, meeting people and talking to people and, watching people enjoy the rodeo. It was great. I mean, there was like thousands of people there with, bronco busting and bull riding and, people doing team roping and stuff. It was an incredible amount of fun. So that's the other thing that I'm enjoying doing right now as well.
That's
Very
awesome.
nice. Yeah, awesome.
So, again, John, it was definitely a pleasure to have you on the show. And but before we let you go, is there anything you want to share with our listeners?
Not off the top of my head. I think we covered a lot of material in the call in the show. I think that again, part of my mission at SquareX is just making sure that people understand. Look at your shadow SaaS, right? Look at your SaaS. Make sure you understand where your data is going, and if you can do something to protect your folks, do that and enjoy.
Yeah, awesome.
Thank you. And
Thanks, Sean.
thank you to those of you joining us for another episode of the Cyber Coffee Hour, part of the Alive Podcast Network. If you enjoyed this episode, explore more engaging content in the Alive Podcast Network app. By supporting this podcast and nearly 100 other Black-hosted shows, you can enjoy ad-free listening while contributing to a diverse range of voices in the podcasting space. We appreciate your support and look forward to sharing more insightful conversations with you in our next episode. So until then, keep brewing those ideas and stay curious about cybersecurity. All right, that's it. It's a wrap. We out of here. Peace.
Thanks, y'all.